Hi, my name is Chris Colati, and I'm a Principal Technical Marketing Architect for vCloud Hybrid Service. And today what I'm going to do is show you how to fail over an existing application that's running a public website on-premise over to vCloud Hybrid Service Disaster Recovery and update its external DNS to a new public IP address that will be available in the disaster recovery environment. So this is a little bit unique where I've actually got a couple of things actually pre-configured on the back end. So I'll just show you really quick that I have this WordPress server here that is actually being replicated currently into VCHS. So we can see that in this multi-tenant cloud where we have our replication actually showing a success, and it was done today. And just to give a little bit of background, this is actually being managed through Dyn.com for external DNS. So this is the current A record. So if I actually go and look up you can see I've done an NS lookup here for wordpress.vmtm.org, and here's its public IP address, which is actually running in my lab as a real public IP address. And if we actually hit that website, we can see that it is going to bring up a real page for this virtual machine. So one of the things I'm going to do is I'm actually going to initiate the failover from this particular virtual machine in vCloud Hybrid Service Disaster Recovery. So you can see I can actually run a test and I can run a full cleanup of this. I'm going to assume that my primary VM is no longer available, so I'm actually going to run a recovery. And if I do it from here, we'll see the original virtual machine will probably continue to stay online, but we're going to assume that it's been destroyed. So what I'm going to do is kick off the recovery. It's going to tell us that it's going to stop replication and recover the virtual machine. So we are performing this in our protected site. So I'm going to go ahead and say continue, and we'll let this recovery actually finish up, and we'll see that it's actually performing a replication. And it may actually, in fact, shut down the virtual machine on this side because we've initiated it as planned recovery, so that it knows that there was an initial replication happening previously. So we'll let that complete, and then we'll take a look at some of the next steps that you do in a second. So we can see now that the recovery was successfully completed on that virtual machine, and you can see here that it shows that it was in fact recovered, and it actually did power on this virtual machine. And if we take a look at the settings of this machine here, we're going to see that from a networks perspective, it was actually connected to our corporate routed network, which is okay because that is what we configured as our failover network. Now we would have had the option to change that when we failed it over. We could go ahead and power this off, but it actually doesn't matter which network it uses. They all have access to the internet. So what I'm now going to do is, if we actually look in Virtual Center, this virtual machine is actually still running. So we should be able to refresh our DNS here, and we should be able to connect to that via both the original IP address and the DNS name. And I'm doing this because I actually want to show that we are going to actually assign this a new IP address. Again, remember that in the event of a failure of the original site, this original IP would be a burning crater in the ground. So now we're going to actually do some really basic configuration to allow this to connect on another external IP address from the cloud. So if we look at our virtual machine in vCloud Director, first thing we want to do is see what IP address it has been given. So we're going to take a look through the static IP pools and other networking that's already been pre-configured. We can see that it's been assigned 192.168.185.220. And what we're also going to do is we're going to look at this edge gateway because we got to decide which external IP address we want to use. So for now, we'll use this IP address that's already assigned. And what we have to do is we have to write a couple of basic NAT rules. Right now, if we actually try to hit that public IP address, we're not going to get anything. It's just going to come up and say that nothing's available on that IP. So we've got to actually write our basic firewall rules and a DNAT rule for this to actually work. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a destination NAT rule, and we're going to give the original external IP address as our external IP. We're gonna, for the sake of the NAT, I'm just gonna do an any rule, and then we'll control it through the actual firewall rule. So we're going to say that this is allowed to 185.220, which was the IP address that was assigned by the static IP pool. And you can see that that virtual machine does have access to get outbound, but there's obviously nothing allowing it inbound. So we have to write a very simple rule, which is to allow WordPress inbound. And we're going to put our source IP address as our public IP. We're going to say source port is going to be any. Our destination, again, will be our 192.168.185.220. Our destination port, we're going to restrict this down to port 80, and we're going to say OK. So we're basically, if we read this rule, if anything comes in on our external IP, it's been translated through the destination NAT, but at the same time, we want to make sure that our rule is going to work. Actually, I'm going to tweak this a little bit. We actually want our destination source to be external, because we want everything from the external on any port coming to the destination of our external gateway IP address on port 80 to be allowed, and then our NAT rule will actually do the translation for us. So if we actually hit save, we're going to let that, and you can see this actually failed out loading that page. We're going to wait for this rule to finish configuring in a second. And what we should be able to do is we should be able to now connect to this external IP in vCloud Hybrid Service, and we should get to our vmtm.corporation. Now we can see that we've got our web server is originally responding for proof purposes on our on-premise version and our hybrid service version. But if we remember, our name record, our external DNS, is pointing to our on-premise environment. So that's actually very easy. What we're going to do is we're just going to open this up. We're going to update that IP address. We're going to allow that to be published. And this will take, obviously, a little bit of time to replicate. So you can see here, after a little bit of waiting, if we now look up our wordpress.vmtm.org, we can see that we're now actually getting the new IP address that we've configured in Dyn.com, because our TTL was actually set very low, so that was our original one. And now if we open up another browser, we can still hit that from our DNS, and just to show that it is now 100% cut over, I'm actually going to go ahead on this WordPress box here on premise, and I'm actually going to shut down this guest OS because that will fully simulate that the site went offline, so that we can see that ultimately, once this is actually shut down and powered off, our original IP address, which was our 200.33, now no longer responds. Our vCloud based IP address still responds on IP address, and it continues to respond on the DNS as well. So all things being equal, we now have our site failed over properly to our vCloud Hybrid Service, and we would be able to make changes to this and then bring it back on premises if we wanted to. So key things to remember here is when you're dealing with a public IP address and a public website is where is your external DNS actually living, and where is it being resolved to. You want to make sure that you obviously update those IPs, and you have a low enough TTL on your external IP addresses, so that when you do fail over and you do have to change an IP address, your outage is only as long as your DNS updates and replication take. That's usually, most people tend to leave that out or forget about that, but if you get your TTL set to days, it'll take people's client machines a long time to update. So hopefully that gives you a nice little example of a public web server real-time running with real IP addresses failed over and getting some IP update changes. So see you all next week at EMC World, and I'll be doing some more presentations and videos on the disaster recovery service as we go forward.